Alright, so now we're talking about life just prior to the war in the Selective Service Act of 1940. This is a law that basically provided for the ability to draft soldiers during the war. It banned any kind of racial discrimination, although the armed services, according to their rules, were still allowed to segregate their military. So they continued to be segregated through World War I, World War II, and I believe they finally broke it up during Korea. Probably the most famous group of segregated soldiers were actually the Tuskegee Airmen, and it was a very controversial time period because to be a pilot in the U.S., what was then the Air Corps of the Army, would require that you be an officer, and there were very, very, very few African American officers. So this was controversial for two reasons. One, there were no African American pilots at all until these guys came around, and there were very, very few African American officers. So this was a double whammy as far as the integration and advancement of African Americans in the military. All right, now let's talk about the transition into peacetime. That's a terrible graphic because you can't really see the words, but it says transition into peacetime. All right, the GI Bill. So all these vets come home, and what are they going to do? Some of them left when they were 18. They come back when they're 23. What are they going to do? Are they going to go back to school, go back to work? The GI Bill of Rights was basically a bill put in place, it was a law put in place, that allowed to help pay for the education, college level education of veterans, and provided very low interest on housing and the ability to open businesses. So that it provided low interest loans to help vets come in who basically were taken out of the workforce for up to 5 years, depending on when they entered the war, and they could actually jump in and get kind of a leg up to where they would be a little more equal with somebody who had to stick it out at the home front during the war. Trip, go back in your room, okay? I'll be right there in just a minute, all right? I'm almost done. It's my son telling me he's cleaned his room. All right, so Levittown, planned suburban communities. This is where the suburbs start really popping up a lot, in part because all these vets come home and they got access to low-interest loans. They can buy homes. So suburbs are getting very big. They can expand out, leave the city, and this is the traditional cookie-cutter houses from the 1950s. They were cheap. They were mass-produced. You see a lot of them nowadays. You see some in Rocky Mountain areas and areas around where we live. But it was all during the 1950s. And this is an aerial view of some of those levy home kind of places. They're just these huge swaths of land where they just stuck a bunch of houses because these people got home. They got these low-interest housing loans. They could move out of the city and start a family. And they started families. So from 1945, right after the war, to 1964, so up until really the beginning of the conflict in Vietnam, you saw a huge increase in the birth rate. And most of our parents and a lot of our grandparents now are boomers. So baby boomers started turning 60 right around the time period when you hit 2005. So a lot of these folks are turning 60 now. They're getting older. It's one of the issues that we still deal with today and economically because we have Social Security people on Social Security outpacing new people being born to pay into it. It's becoming a big issue. But we had this big increase in people being born right after 1945 because, hey, all these men came home, got married, made babies. That's what they did when they got here. We also saw a large growth in the middle class. Part of this is because America was the sole industrial nation that was really left. Japan was industrialized. They got the crap bombed out of them. Germany, obviously industrialized. War reparations, bombing the crap out of them. France was industrialized, got the crap bombed out of them. England was industrialized, got the crap bombed out of them. Really, in the 1950s, we were the only real industrial power left buying, selling, producing stuff. So we were able to benefit from that a great deal. So the middle class expands equally at that time. If you ever heard the show Leave It to Beaver, this is the quote-unquote stereotypical family from this post-war period, this baby boomer time period, where everything's like white picket fences, green lawns, and Beaver cheating on his test and other silly little things, although it's not totally historically accurate. All right, now we're going to talk about Truman's Fair Deal. So this is his initiative trying to get reelected in 1948. He wanted to institute military integration, so no more segregation of members of the military. He wanted to increase the minimum wage, help workers out. He wanted to broaden Social Security, so basically expand people who were getting closer to that Social Security age, have a little bit more money for them. And he wanted to institute low cost and low health care costs across the board through various government initiatives. To that end, on the Labor Relations Act, he got passed the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. It limited the power of labor unions. Said you can't have closed shop. A closed shop is where you can't work here unless you're a member of the union. He said that is not. He basically outlawed that. The AFL-CIO was the largest labor union and was led by a guy named George Meany back in 1955. So these two were in direct conflict. You had this guy right here, Truman, who was not really anti-labor, but he was anti-labor union to a certain extent. And then you got the AFL-CIO, which was the largest labor union in the U.S. in 1955, and they were in direct conflict with each other. And that's the end of this lecture. This is kind of a mishmash portion of the lecture because there's these various little things that happen after the war that relate to baby boomers and various labor union issues. So it's kind of a miscellaneous category if you want to put it into a category for this lecture. It's just kind of an umbrella catching up stuff that doesn't quite fit anywhere else.